In this video, you can see how to place beads in knitting like this. I'll be using a bead needle like the one I'll show you here. It is a very fine and thin needle, especially well suited for placing the small bead needles. You can see here how it opens and has an open center, and it is gathered in the two ends like this. However, we will cut this one in two parts with a scissor that you're not too fond of. Don't use your best scissor for this purpose. This one is the one my dog has been biting, so it will be suitable for cutting in metal pieces like this. Now we've got two ends in our bead needle, and also we have actually two needles instead of one, which is very good because they easily get lost because they're so small and thin. I will now place my bead needle in the stitch on my needle. Just one leg of the bead needle goes into the stitch, and I can now take the stitch off the needle and be ready to place a bead. I'll now gather the two legs of the bead needle and make sure they are really tight held together so that they will go into the bead, the hole in the bead easily. Now let me grab a really good bead for this one. Let's take this golden bead. I'll now try to catch the holes in the bead like that, both legs of the needle, and then gently drag the bead down the needle onto the stitch at the end like this, and I can now drag the yarn through the hole in the bead and place the little stitch back on the needle again. First of all, I'll take out the bead needle. I'll sort of just reverse it out of the stitch, and now I can place the stitch back on the needle again. Now the stitch is ready to be worked in whichever knitting I would like to work it, and this one is a knit one. Look at this, we have the bead nicely placed, and you can, to make it even more tight and nice, sort of push the bead up the stitch to place it in the center of the stitch. The very good thing about this technique is that it's so easy to place exactly the bead you'd like to place in exactly the spot you have come to. If I, for instance, would love to place, let's say, a bead in a rose color, I can simply choose that one now and place it on the stitch I want to. I could also use a crochet needle of a very thin kind. This one is a 0.5 millimeters, and then I simply place the bead on the needle like this and stick into the stitch, drag it off the knitting needle, and if you notice, this hook has a very little tiny head. Then this tiny head has to get hold of the yarn while you drag the yarn through the bead. And this can be tricky when you are using this small beads as we are using in this project, because it's quite hard to get the yarn all the way through the hole in the bead, and it can become a bit fluffy like this and a bit tangled, so I will have to catch the yarn afterwards. I'll just try once more to see if I can get this one get a bit more yarn through the hole with my crochet needle. This actually illustrates quite well how the crochet needle is not quite as useful here, because you need this small size of of crochet needle, you'll also have a very small head of the crochet needle, and it might not be sufficient to drag your yarn through the little hole in the bead. We're using beads of 4 millimeters only, so that's why the bead needle can be a more sufficient tool than the actual crochet needle. But have a look if we can try once more to drag this yarn. I hope if I catch it with my thumb and index finger here, I can better. Yeah, I had a little more success dragging more yarn through the bead hole this time. It is really a personal matter if you prefer the one technique to the other. I get a better flow with the bead needle, but you might love to use the crochet needle. Anyway, now I have my rose bead placed and I can knit again. And again I will push the bead up the stitch to place it in the center of the stitch. This technique is really my favorite to place beads in knitting, because you can exactly place the color of bead in the spot of the knitting that you decide. There are other techniques where you drag the beads on the working yarn on behalf of before you start knitting, but I prefer this one to that. Now to the end, I'll just show you once more how to place a bead on your knitting with a bead needle. Again, I place the bead needle in the stitch and then I drag the bead onto the bead needle all the way down and drag it onto the stitch. And sometimes this bead has a little narrow hole, so I'll have to sort of drag it a bit more hard to get it all the way down on the stitch. So I just need to get the yarn through here, and it now finally succeeded. When dragging out again the bead needle, I like to go backwards to ensure that if the bead needle had got tangled in any way in the yarn, it will easily tangle out again. Yeah, and now I'm ready to work the stitch with my working yarn. The bead is nicely down the stitch, so it makes it easy to work the stitch, knit one, and now again I can push up the bead on the stitch nicely. Yeah, so have fun placing lots of beads in your knitting in future.